Whoa, where am I?
Hey Hank, I'm Oil Father, and I'm going to show you how important oil is in our everyday life. Let me take you on a journey.
Why'd you take me here?
I took you here, Hank, because this school is new Trier, and it is a prime example of the effects of the baby boom. So the baby boom was when husbands that were fighting in World War II returned back home to their happy wives who just couldn't wait to see them. And so this time was a time when people wanted to settle down and just relax after such a stressful time of World War II. So what happened was a lot of these couples wanted to start families, but they wanted to start them in rural areas that weren't as crazy as the cities. So when a lot of people moved to these rural areas, it created suburbs. And since so many people were having so many kids, the population boomed, and that's why we call it the baby boom. So this prime example is a great example because the population went from just over 2,000 in 1951 to just over 6,000 in 1970, which is a great example of how greatly the population skyrocketed. And this new campus behind us was created because the old school of New Trier couldn't hold all 7,000 kids that were now going and attending.
But didn't the Cold War happen right after World War II?
The Cold War did happen right after the World War II, and let me explain what happened. So the Cold War was when Russia, which was a communist country, and the United States, which was a democratic country, formed a rivalry against each other. And they were trying to turn other countries their respected form of government. So the way that they would fight each other is they would fight between what's called proxy wars, which was if a country was split in between deciding if they were going to become democratic and deciding if they were going to become communism, the United States would help and support the democratic parties in that country, and the Soviet Union would help and support the communist parties in that country so that they could create their respected sides stronger, and so that they would hope would turn the country either communist for the Soviet Union or democratic for the United States. And so this got so big that it got down to even to sports and movies, where in United States movies, the bad guys would be Russians, or the bad guys would be a part of the Soviet Union. And a good example of this is in Red Dawn, when a bunch of good old college United States students defeat a big fleet of Soviet Union soldiers, and it's super, super patriotic, and everyone loved it, and everyone defeated the bad old Russians. And another example in sports is when the United States hockey team beat the Russian hockey team in what is considered one of the biggest upsets in sports history, because this was bigger than sports because it made the United States people feel more powerful than the Russians, and the Russian people feel a lot more deflated and weaker that their powerful hockey team just lost to a bunch of college United States hockey players. This also in the Cold War sped up incredible nuclear warfare and bomb development, because the United States always wanted to be better than the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union always wanted to be better than the United States. And so they were competing for almost everything.
So why does this all matter today?
This all matters today because it all relates to call culture.
Why did you take me to a suburban parking lot?
I took you to a suburban parking lot, Hank, because I wanted to talk to you more about suburbs. Suburbs can't function without cars because suburbs are so spread out and you need a car to get from place to place, unlike cities where you can walk from place to place. So after World War II, when people started moving into rural areas and creating suburbs, cars became much more evident in everyday life, and people started buying a lot more cars. So the car industry went shooting up. And after that, cars started to become a symbol of social class and wealth within our society.
So how does cars relate to oil?
So cars relate to oil, Hank, because cars can't function without oil. And since cars can't function without oil, the demand for oil went way up when the car industry went way up with them. And so this is so big because the United States started to get a lot more oil from the Middle East because oil is so huge there, and it's so evident there as well.
How does this map relate to the Middle East?
This map relates to the Middle East, Hank, because it shows this region right here known as the Middle East. The Middle East is the biggest oil supplier in the world, and a lot of countries like the US, France, Germany, England, these big name countries try to form relations with these countries so they can get their oil supply. Now the problem with that is that it starts wars, and that's why the US especially has a lot of wars going on in the Middle East in countries like Syria, Iran, and Iraq, and that's happened in the past. Now, another thing that happens is a lot of these Middle East countries are having their own battles and civil wars. Countries like Yemen, Syria, countries like Iraq, they're all having their civil wars over territory, but especially over oil because of how important it is in the world. So an example of this is between Iran and Israel, which is a war going on, where Iran, since Israel's really small, the Iranian government thinks that it should have control over Israel, its territory, and its oil mines, and especially its oil mines, because it really wants to take control of that because of how much that's worth and how much it means to them. So the reason that there's so much going on here and that there's so much conflict is that a lot of these countries, actually, Hank, listen to me, a lot of these countries were colonized by countries over here, like France, Germany, England, because those were very big, powerful countries around World War II. Now, when World War II ended, a lot of these countries got their own independence and they decolonized. So now that they had their own independence, they had trouble restarting their country because they didn't really have or know a good form of government to keep a stable country. So that's why there's a lot of conflict going on here, and that's why a lot of these countries are struggling and having wars here.
Why are we in a field?
I took you to this field, Hank, to teach you about the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution happened after World War II, and what happened was many countries needed to produce a lot more food with their growing populations. So, after World War II, the population in the world was about 3.7 billion people, but 900 million of them were not living with the food needed to survive. This whole process started in the Middle East, or in India specifically, in about the year of, or around the year of 1960. So, after World War II, America was producing a lot of the food for the world, but everyone knew that this wouldn't last, because everyone knew that one country couldn't provide a lot of the food for the whole world. So what we did was we sent some scientists down to Mexico, and what we were trying to do there was we were going to try to create a new wheat product that would yield twice the production, and it ended up working, which was a huge success for the world and a huge success for a lot of the hungry people in the world, because we knew that this would have a very positive impact on world hunger. So that whole experiment was funded by the Rockefeller Center, and Rockefeller was a very, very rich man who was very, 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 very active in the oil industry, and he owned a monopoly within the oil industry. And that is a big part of why we're talking about this, and that's a big part of how this relates to oil.
Other than Rockefeller, how else does this relate to oil?
This relates to oil, Hank, because the chemicals that farmers would use to make unfertilized land farmable were called petrochemicals. These petrochemicals were especially used in LDCs, which raised the demand for oil there because oil was in these petrochemicals. The bad thing about this was that these petrochemicals were harmful for the environment, and now farmers are not trying to use these and trying to do something called going green to help the environment out. Hank, I took you to the future.
Why? Why are we here?
I wanted to talk to you about the future of oil. Oil right now is very, very cheap, and we use it in our everyday life. We use it in our cars, we use it in our clothes, and we use it in everyday appliances. And if you went into a room, I bet you that a lot of your items would be made with, or part of it would be made with oil. The only problem with this is that oil is not renewable, and geologists haven't found any new oil reserves in many years. So what we need to do in the future is we need to find new oil reserves, or we need to find an alternate source for oil to replace it, because oil is such a big part of our everyday lives. Hugs and kisses, Grandma.
Oh, wow. I just learned how important oil is in our everyday lives.